Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and welcome to TKT Visionaries, our monthly podcast where we talk to industry experts about what is affecting our industry. And today, I'm lucky to have two people that not only are industry experts, but also I can call friends. We have Cassidy Phillips, who's the lead solution architect for Switch.io. He's also the SMPTE governor of the Pacific Northwest region. Cassidy has been involved in over 40 successful SMPTE 2110 projects from design to deployment and is now working to move 2110 into the cloud. And my second guest is Jesse Janosky of JPM Technology Consulting. He's an 18-year veteran of the industry and first started his 2110 journey in 2017 with a multi-venue deployment at Texas A&M University and has continued working on deployments since, both on the end-user side and design integration side. Most recently, he designed and managed the multi-vendor 2110 deployment for the State Farm Stadium in time for this year's Super Bowl. So welcome to both Jesse and Cassidy, and thank you guys both for being here. I think the first question I have really is to you, Jesse, is are people adopting 2110 now? Are we seeing it as the, hey, we're going to build something and it's 2110, or do we still have people going, oh, maybe 2110, I may be thinking about SDI? Have we reached that sort of tipping point?
So I think that we have. I think everybody is moving towards 2110, and the people that are actually resisting are not actually the actual end users. I see a lot more younger crowd coming through in the engineering space, and they're actually adopting and embracing. It's more of the installers and designers are still pushing towards the 12G and baseband. Just the fear of it seems like a knowledge or gripping on to what's known. But I think we've made leaps and bounds definitely over the last 12 months of end users actually fully embracing and adopting. I know there's some other deployments that they're actually trying to look outside the box and look at other switch manufacturers, or such as cloud deployments that are multi-hybrid that are adding on to 2110, not just making the leap. Do they go 2110 or do they stay baseband?
All right. And same question to you, Cassidy. Are you seeing in the work that you're doing, is there still that hesitancy, or are they finally going, hey, we're going all in and we're just going to adopt it and move forward?
It's funny, Phil, because you remember we were at the beginning of the 2110 stuff and having to explain even just the basic concept to people, and we really did have people ask us over and over again, "Where's my patch bay?" And now it's like, to Jesse's point, the question has gone so much further to, well, I have multiple sites and I want to bring them together with a cloud connection, and I need to think about operational efficiency and remote operations and all these different things that really were not as much of the conversation a few years ago. So I think I don't hear anything about SDI. Now, maybe that's because I sort of live in the cloud at this point. So anything that's being handed to me is IP anyway. But at the same time, I think just the operational benefits of 2110 have been realized. And now that we can actually do multicast in the cloud, it opens up those same 2110 capabilities, whether it's compressed or uncompressed. And then just the production possibilities of 2110 are there. So, to Jesse's point again, people who look at the flexibility, they're excited about it. And if they're not intimidated by the idea that, now I need to think of a multicast schema and understand a network topology that's a little different, then they'll just jump right in.
Okay. Yeah, Cassidy.
Go ahead.
Yeah, no, Cassidy, like I said, you've been in way more deployments than I have. And I remember from the beginning, like, it just shows that we have, when we started off, we were still doing one manufacturer for everything. And now, like, I see every single deployment, like I'm working on two of them now, and they're all multi-vendor. So like, even in the baseband world, it's a double-edged sword. One, it shows that people are adopting it and they're trying to think outside the box with multiple vendors. But then also it shows you that what the benefits are. So before, you bought the router, you bought the glue gear, you bought the DAs, whatever you had from one person, and they always would sell you the one throat to choke, and then that was, the best service, the best reaction. And now it's more like, hey, we can work the pitches, we can work with everybody. So whether that's new or not.
And that actually brings up an interesting question. So, as you pointed out, in the past, it used to be the giant refrigerator that was the router. You bought that and had its own control system, and that was the core of your system. Now, the core of the system is a IP switch. So it's a Cisco or Arista or Mellanox or whoever. So it's given opportunities for other manufacturers, I think like Lavo, who weren't necessarily in the video routing side to sort of create these control systems. Are you seeing more people jump into that on the control system side? Or are we still looking at the traditional Evertz and Imagine and Grass as the primary dominance for that routing control?
I mean, you brought up the Lavo. There's a solution that's out of Germany called High Broadcast Solutions that Imagine uses, and that group came off of Lavo. So not only is there more control systems coming, but some of the people that are into, what our changing world is, they're spinning off into different sections and creating their own control system because they found it now where we're not there yet, but we're using IT-based standards in a broadcast mindset, but they're moving towards that as IT standards. So now we can take advantage of people that know how to write scripting and applications and anything that can make them move back and forth. So yeah, I mean, EVS is making a big dent with their Cerebrum right now. I've seen at least I know of 3 deployments where they're only doing control and they don't have any type of gateway gear. So I see more people actually adopting and doing it piecemeal. And that might not be the right term, but people are doing it more multi-vendor in the fact where they're like, okay, we're going to set up a graph just like you would do a hiring sheet where we're going to do these 4 control systems. And we know that this is the gateway appliance, so we're going to try it and see how it works. And it might not be the Imagine control system. It might be the EVS control system or Evertz control system. And they go through that whole process and then they say, okay, that's control. What's next? Let's go to audio. All right, what's the 5 audio vendors we want? All right, let's cut it down to 3. Let's do the same graph. And that's usually like what I see in the end user space that they're going through in the process. It seems like it's moving away from the RFP, just write it down and we think what's best, and it's more towards like a selection process.
Do you see, you mentioned audio, do you see, because obviously the 2110 standard really gives you a lot of flexibility around the audio side, and it obviously adopts the AES 67, are we seeing, in the past you used to separate out, you used to have an audio router or a sub portion of your router. Are you seeing the sort of that whole integrated, we're buying a set of switches and everything is going to go on there? Or are we still sort of segregating that out? What do you sort of see that direction going on the audio side?
So I think it's just not as dense as video, but it's also instead of multi-vendor, it's multi-transport. So how do we keep what we use depending what the operator is? Do we stay analog and MADI? Do we put Dante in there? Do we use the -30 standard? There's so many different things that have to work interoperably that you're almost, and it's kind of like the lost cause. I'll defer to Cassidy because he's done enough of these audio deployments, but I find it's my biggest weakness that I overlook the audio. And then when I get on site and start looking, it's usually adjustments to audio are the first thing that come up in a discussion when we start actually doing the commissioning work.
Yeah. What do they say? Video without audio is radio, audio without video is radio. Video without audio is security cam footage.
That's actually pretty good.
Yeah. So, Cassidy, what are you kind of seeing on the audio side?
Yeah, so it ties into the larger. There was something that Jesse made me think of while he was going through kind of the motivation of best of breed in general, right? Why do that at all? And one of the biggest 2110 users I've seen, their motivation, NFL, Hollywood Park, NFL Media, was they wanted the ability to swap things out whenever they felt like it, whenever something needed to be upgraded or they decided to go to a larger video format or do something new. They weren't worried about a 5 or 7 or a 10-year, refresh, the RFP period type of thing. They were just thinking about creating the best content they possibly can at any given moment. And so that's been one of the motivators in this thing of I don't need to have the control system be the same manufacturer as everybody else in the system, because I might decide I want the better gateway from whoever next year and just pull it out. And so that's where the standards-based thing comes into play. But the other point is who the humans are in each of these things. So to Jesse's point about the audio, no matter what you do, unless it's a really small production, the audio person is probably a different human from the technical director. And so there's sort of operational design reasons why you might have, if not a different product in a different database, at least find a way to virtually segregate those things so that you don't have people stepping on each other's toes. Mm-hmm. But you also factor in the emotional thing. Jesse and I dealt with this on our design. I won't name which one, but one of them where, there was a very personal, emotional attachment to certain types of feel with the audio system and the board. We see that a lot, right? What type of production switch or audio board or replay system someone is kind of emotionally married to. And, maybe you don't want that to take over the entire system. You just want to give them what they want and then do the things that are there. So every one of my systems has been a little different in that way. And typically, unfortunately, a lot of the time it's a matter of the audio system is not necessarily being refreshed at the same time as the video system, even, especially in television stations. It might be that they're keeping the existing workflow. And if we're lucky, it's AES 67 and they can use PTP version 1. The video system will use PTP version 2. So you kind of create different zones and different fabrics. And then the thing I recommended more often than not was to have some sort of a gateway between them, whether that was a MADI bridge or, a NAT, something so that you didn't have to worry about the audio folks accidentally stealing a route from the video folks and vice versa.
I want to bring in our other special guest that joined us, Luciano. If you want to sort of quickly introduce yourself, I think I have some questions for you as well.
Yes, I'm Luciano. I'm working in Italy, in Sky. Sky is a company that have 3 sites in Europe, Italy, UK, and Germany, and it's also part of Contact. We started a few years ago with the 2110, and we implemented our facility with 2110, and now we are working with Switch.io to bring the 2110 and with the multicast on the cloud. Mm-hmm. We are moving a lot of facility in the cloud, and I think also to enable the multicast in the cloud will make a game change for us and all our facilities.
Yeah. I'm very familiar with Sky Italia. That was a name that was bounced around when I was at the Imagine group for Imagine Communications for a long time. I think it was early on before 2110. It was the 2022. With a facility like Sky, I mean, it's massive, obviously a large implementation. Are you... Is the 2110 providing you guys opportunities to do things that you haven't been able to do or weren't able to do with SDI? And what would those things be that IP enables?
I think the biggest advantage is to unblock the limitation of the size of the router. So everything will be, is a network. So is shared to across the different device. Of course, we didn't complete the migration yet with all the studio and all the facility. We started 1 year ago. We have something in place, and now we are moving on things. And the biggest benefit is to share resource, and everyone can bring anything. You don't need to use tie line between the different sub-router in the production center. Mm-hmm. And also the audio is have a big benefit. One of the big limitation that we saw in 2110 is the audio, because ideally having the multicast that in theory you can do any shuffling at the edge level, but the limit of the number of multicast source that you can run in a fabric is becoming a limit. So we decided right or not, but to use two of multicast of 8, and now every time that we have to do some shuffling on some breakaway, we need to use some audio routing, IP audio routing, of course, to, let's say, to do this kind of thing. So it is something that I think have to improve a little bit. The audio part is still one of the biggest headache that we have.
Yeah, I
Well,
think
Cash, I was
that's,
just say,
Phil,
go ahead.
yeah, I'll jump
Go ahead.
on that a little bit. So Sky was early, right? Sky
Yeah.
wanted 2110 before the standard was even finalized. And, that the point he makes is right on, that there was a limitation in a lot of the devices, and there still is in a few, of how many audio channels they could handle per multicast stream, for example.
Mm-hmm.
And then you had to get all of those devices to agree with each other on one thing. And so, even if production wanted to do one audio channel per multicast, they couldn't necessarily do it in every device in the fabric. So you had to compromise and find another place to do it. I think that's been less of a restriction in the current generation, but for people like Sky that went early, they had to have kind of a designated mono shuffling area in the system. Now, again, for political reasons, maybe it's not so bad because you have your audio team that's separate from your video team, but then you have to trust, so for example, for me as a former master control operator, there absolutely might be times where you're the final point before that program goes out to the world and you need to change the audio channels. So you want to have a device that can actually swap those audio channels around.
Okay. Jesse, with obviously with 2110, you can do a lot of IP in general. You can do a lot of things that you couldn't do with SDI. Are you seeing customers embrace that capability, or do you see them mainly sort of replicating what they do in SDI but doing it in the IP environment?
So I think I do see them taking advantage. So mostly they do take advantage in the places we didn't think. So like everything, we have a vision and then we learn about it and then we try to break everything that we used to know. So the most of the integrations I see is like, I'm staring at one now. So using like universal switch panels and making custom scripting, custom SDP files that allow me to bring my Elgato Stream Deck in and that I can run basically a little salvo off of. Trying to build a virtual GUI or GUI, depending on how you say it. Most people are looking at that, but the biggest place that I see a lot of innovation is the multi-view. So before, you used to have a multi-view and it was restricted to a card-based multi-view or something that was coming off the back of your router, your video router. And now with, Tag was one of them that came as COTS, and I'm sure there's some more out of there. I just had experience with Tag. It's kind of pushed some others, like Evertz has come out with a COTS-based multi-view, and now you see people that are developing their own ways to pull data. I work a lot in the sports world, so they were integrating with Daktronics to get their controllers to pull time of game and timeouts and scoring. That's something that we did for Super Bowl. Integration between different leagues and what the stat generation is. So then now I can put it into my replay system. Now I can edit it and export it over to my editing. So now I don't have to have somebody that's a metadata tagger. So I see a lot of innovation in that side, and all that innovation is one of the things that I know Cassidy, known him personally, and Phil, but me especially, is it's being driven by some younger engineers. And Cassidy mentioned in something with the audio and video, it's trust. And I think that that's kind of evolving as well, is that we have some trust in letting some people that just didn't have a background in engineering and giving them the opportunity to contribute. And that has helped with the development of 2110 and bringing some connection that I know that I didn't have coming into the industry, was between the broadcast and IT, and on trusting people to go out and trying with a notion of failure. It's a controlled failure, but people are more susceptible to, hey, let's try this and see if it works on a non-critical source, versus before, where it was, I never was able to try anything because I was always so afraid of failure or bringing down the system or XYZ, doomsday.
So a similar question to you, Cassidy. Obviously, in the work that you're doing with Switch.io, it's sort of at a cutting edge, leading edge. People are moving these things to the cloud. Are you seeing customers sort of embrace the 2110 and looking to do things differently than they had in the past?
Yeah, absolutely. I would be, I was shocked. NAB was the first time I went as a representative of this part, the technology. The first time I went was Switch and represented cloud. And I thought I would have to do a lot more evangelism the way we did with 2110 to try to reframe IP in an SDI centric way. I actually had people coming up to me proposing, well, hey, I kind of have this odd problem. Tell me all of the completely new ways I can look at this. And so it was a much more open, conversation than I expected it to be. And I had all these workflows designed based on sort of legacy concepts. Every conversation I've had where someone says, oh, I'm looking to add redundancy and high availability. And I say, well, we can actually do 2110 with 2022-7 in the cloud. And instead of having to go into a deep explanation of what that is, they say, oh, excellent. And they're on board. So, and then it gets into when you have the cloud with that more elastic set of resources, it's almost trying to rein people in so they don't experiment too much, mostly because you want to get to where the system is actually designed and they can go deploy something, because we could have a lot of fun in the sandbox if you have the time and the resource.
But don't you think, Cassidy, don't you think it's for like the Google effect, that most of the stuff is getting deployed on somebody's lunch break? That now, like, our best the narrative has gone to our best R&D has been the customer side.
Yeah. Yep. I agree with that. Yep.
So, Luciano, so you're a unique question to you because you're in Europe, in the EMEA. Here in the States, we're sort of monolithic, although some could say that coming to Alabama or Georgia, where I live, is like another country. But in Europe, are you seeing the adoption rates of this technology of 2110 similar across the European continent, the EU, or are you seeing certain countries adopting it more than other countries?
But in general, yes, I saw that there is, let's say, growing the number of television and service provider that is starting with using 2110. Of course, everyone have his own view. There is a lot of things that is going on in this day. Probably in the outside broadcast, I saw that let's say there is probably a limit in terms of the competence that you can bring, within a mobile track that is going around, because you need to have a quite expert team that normally is a IT-based team, and it's kind of engineer, not the type of people that normally is going on the outside broadcast venue to stay away from home for all the time. But there are some. So, I see that they normally prefer to doing something in, and 12G, something like this, not doing. But in general, on the facility, on the broadcast side, on the media hub, the adopting of the 2110 is quite large.
Okay. So Jesse, this is going to be an odd question. It just popped in my head. So obviously in the SDI world, we have the 28RU refrigerator. You bought it from a company, you had their control system, you wanted to go to somebody else's system, you had to replace that. And if you're a 24/7 or even 12 hours a day, that's not a lot of time to swap things out. So you pick the control system that's going to live with you forever. But in the 2110 world, theoretically, outside of, we'll say, routing panels, and I'm not sure if we've gotten to the point where routing panels are somewhat generic with ISO 4, ISO 5, but do you see the maybe people looking at, okay, so I've put in the Lavo system, but 2 years from now, I'm like, they're just not doing it, and Evertz has come out with a new control system, or Imagine, or some third party, and the ability to actually add in someone else's control system is appears to be somewhat easier because it's just a matter of configuring it and being able to talk to the switch in the end devices. And with ISO 4, ISO 5 makes it easy. Do you think we're going to come to that day where we're going to be swapping control systems faster?
I think we're going to come to the day where you're going to stop having the large buys. Mm-hmm. So when you talk about that refrigerator, you bought that refrigerator because you had to buy multiple things make that refrigerator work. You needed the ice chest and the ice cubes and everything that makes a fridge to keep your food cold and be able to eat. Now you can go and get a control system once you move the 2110 and vet it out like we discussed. And you can even do it like there's multiple vendors. And I can't say enough, reach out and call the vendors because almost every vendor has a controlled instance. Now, needless to say, it's a controlled instance with all their manufactured goods connected to it. So you buy everything that they sell. But you can actually, without going and putting it into your system and using the legwork, you can remote in with technology now, run a whole system, play with it in a sandbox before you even make that discussion. So I think when it comes down to it, to your question is, yeah, we'll get there. But at the end, it always comes down to dollars. Like if I went to my CFO and asked him, hey, I need a new control system because this cool shiny widget came out. And he would look at the books and say, well, CapEx 2 years ago said that you spent X amount of dollars. What's it cost? You don't got that. What are you giving up? What are you doing? Are you selling the old one? Because everybody wants to make money off of something they bought. So I could see that, but I see more in. I won't be surprised if people aren't developing their own control systems. I know NEP came out with their own 2110 control system in Australia that they use, and from what I hear is doing very well. And it's very, very specific to them, but the people that use it really enjoy it. Yeah. So as we grow, that's what will happen.
Yeah, I started thinking, in the past it was, because the model was you had this giant refrigerator and you told the refrigerator where to send the signals. And now you're really talking to the endpoint and telling the endpoint what signal to listen to. So I'm just wondering if we're going to start to see that function sort of, especially with ISO 5, where something like Adobe Premiere or DaVinci Resolve, where you're an editor and you need something routed in, that it's built into the system that says, here's the list of things I can get, discovering ISO 4 and being able to select that. I mean, so do you see things like that, Cassidy, coming down the pipe where it becomes, I guess, decentralized to some effect?
Yeah, I would agree because, kind of what you implied earlier is, the control system before was very tightly integrated with the cross-point and the hardware that it came with. If it is ISO 4 and 5 and you're doing discovery and, connection commands with 5, anyone could do it, and these are HTML5 interfaces. It becomes a matter of, well, what do I want my user interface to look like for each individual job or each position? So it could change from one show to the next. At that point, maybe I need to do some DevOps myself, whether I'm the client or the integration team. So every one of these could be different. And like you said, Jesse, when someone comes out with a cool new feature, if you decide, well, I have to have that, similar to the way you would say that with a new camera now, that's kind of the challenge that's being put on the control system manufacturers, is they have to come up with something that's so interesting that it's not just a matter of controlling that big refrigerator. You have to have an interface that is hot compared to the other ones to make that sale.
So as I say, Luciano, are you seeing, is there something that's missing from, whether it's the 2110 standard or from a manufacturer's perspective around 2110, that you guys at Sky are sort of going, I just wish it had this feature, this function, or this standard had been passed? Is there something along those lines that you guys are just, I'm waiting for this?
In general, it's very interesting, the discussion about the controller, because we are looking something that is very difficult to find, because the idea also for us is to share the operation across the different territories, let's say to optimize the night shift and all the work across the group. But in general, one of the point that is not, let's say, fully developed was the managing of the Dolby. The Dolby that is, in theory, the Dash 31. So there are some manufacturer that is supporting it, someone that is not supporting it yet. So, and the moment we are suffering, we are trying to managing the Dolby through the Dash 30, that of course is not compatible with some vendor that of course design the new infrastructure, in the assumption that should be supporting Dash 31. So I think, and also to try to understand how we can handle these with the shopping, with all these kind of things. That is the audio is as usual, as I would say, also in the traditional SDI or EF environment is a headache for us. Is a big problem. Yeah. But the potential is very high because you can do much more than with the traditional thing, but there is still some problem of compatibility. But having in mind that we are, most of our thing we will move on the cloud from a playout, production gallery, and all this kind of thing. We are moving the cloud with the multicast in the cloud and having the possibility to bring native, the 2110 in the cloud. Mainly also the audio will be very, very, very important, and this will be one of the focus that we will have in the next few months as a group.
Okay. Well, that brings an interesting question, Cassidy. So I always remember Hugo from Sony when talking about timing, a precision timing protocol. I love Hugo. But timing is very important, and in our industry, 20 years ago, timing was in the microseconds in order to get color to a line. And it seems as we've gotten, I don't want to say better technology, different technology. If we move from SDI to IP, our timing has gotten a little laxed. We're in milliseconds, and then of course with compression, you're in seconds. But how, and especially in your particular world in cloud, how are you seeing the timing and PTP and where PTP is going affecting what you're able to do, not only in the cloud but across continents?
Yeah, I think there's a couple aspects to it that are really exciting for me, and part of what makes my job interesting right now is we know we can do PTP in the cloud, but it's similar to when we would talk years ago, Phil, about multi-facility with what's the relevance of PTP between those facilities. Well, if I have 2110 with separate essences, it's nice to know when things were created so that I can realign them at least with each other, even if I then restamp to house. In the cloud, different clouds right now have different levels of access to the hardware timestamping. So we're still kind of relying on NTP in most of the cloud environments. But I think that'll change. I think it'll open up to where each of the cloud environments are more understanding that we want access to PTP hardware timestamping. And at that point, we can do a lot more. But even at that, we can sort of emulate based on, we can derive from NTP and then make PTP in the cloud. And what you could do there is say, I have a virtual control room in the cloud, and I'm using PTP to make sure the machines are as closely synced with each other as they can possibly be. And then whatever happens in the cloud is synchronized, right? And so it's kind of the same school of thought where I had these multiple facilities, and I'm using the timestamps that things were created with to realign them and shuffle them up. The joke I always make is PTP does not allow you to bend physics. So you can't teleport. If you wanted to have everything be on the same clock, I can think of a use case where maybe you were doing a really lightweight remote production and you just couldn't get a clock from anywhere except for the cloud. Maybe in that case, it's okay just to make your endpoints happy, your devices in that flight pack or your truck or whatever, happy enough with the clock. But it's not, obviously you'd still have the latency between wherever your kit was. And, so I think for me, it comes back to that 2110 flexibility with the essences, and the timestamps are great. It's what you do with them that matters. If I want to be able to break things up, and say I'm doing a big production where I have audio coming from different continents to cover video from a whole other place, right? I need to have things be consistent, deterministic enough that when they come in and they hit my frame synchronization point, wherever that is, if it's in the cloud, and I say, hey, this is how the lip sync lines up or should stay, that it actually stays that way. And we can get into now, basically hardware levels of accuracy and latency, even in the cloud, even with deriving from NTP. So I'm, basically it's a matter of bandwidth. Luciano talks about, 2110. The biggest issue we see with doing 2110 uncompressed in the cloud is the bandwidth. 2110-22 JPEG XS, not quite as heavy, still bigger than, a lot of what we've been doing in the cloud. And it's just a matter of having that playground and the use case to test it. And the 2110 is just important for the alignment reasons at this point.
Do you see, and I'll ask you to put on your SMPTE governor's hat here for a second. Obviously, with the 22, we're getting the JPEG, and I know this is going to be sort of blasphemous to bring this up with the SMPTE and professional video, but do we see things like NDI potentially fitting into that SMPTE 2110 standard, whether it's 22 or 23, or I think 22 is all compressed. Are they going to have more of the H.264 in there, so that you have a single standard that can have the different, compression values?
I think you're absolutely right on things like H.264 and things that go to a higher compression ratio for smaller bit rates. Obviously, NDI is tough for any of the proprietary type formats, because then it's a matter of what the people who own that format are willing to do. I have to say, I've said it for years, every system I did had some level of hybrid, whether it was interacting with an SDI component or an NDI component or some other older thing that was still around. I've seen 2110 systems that have to deal with analog video still, as a handoff. So it's just a matter of what is the gateway, where is it, and how much of a bottleneck is that gateway? And, it comes back again to that sort of, is the operational need for that other format so big that they can't re-engineer it to be the same as the rest of the system, right?
Yeah. So Jesse, obviously you were, your big event last year, I guess it was last year, the Super Bowl, and we have sports, and we're bringing in, I think you had, was it 15 trucks, 16 trucks alone, not including necessarily a halftime show, but maybe it was including the halftime show. You have all these trucks come in. Do you see a day with 2110, the fact that companies like CenturyLink, which I think is now Lumen, has wired up some stadiums with 100 gig connections, and if we get more and more of that higher bandwidth and fiber into these larger locations, that instead of pulling up 4 or 5 trucks, it may just be a Sprinter van or a single truck? Are we moving in that direction, you think?
So it was actually a good segue. So this was the first Super Bowl, actually, that we were fortunate enough being in Phoenix, is that Fox just built and they were the provider, a large NOC for all their distribution. So we actually lit up 200 gig circuits back and forth for Tempe for distribution. And in the main area where we normally park trucks, they only park 2 trucks. They actually put up a tent, and they used the fly packs from World Cup that were built, and they shipped those in a shipping container. So I think that's where we're looking at, is you're looking more at a fly pack or a movable control room, with the, trying to back to the CFO, it's what the cost is, but they were able to use that system as their FATS system, which is basically their distribution to every international feed throughout the stadium to us. And it was just a contribution hub that they set up. And it was 2 large tents, one that was set up above ground on the concourse level, and then one that was set down on the field level. And that did all the distribution for Fox. And I know there's a lot of documentation on it. It's a great read on how they're moving it. It went from Men's World Cup to us to the Women's World Cup, which is, I think, kicking off tomorrow, I believe, or Thursday. Yeah. So that's getting used.
Do we see the day where, say, NEP's not going to be around, or All Mobile or Game Creek, or being a completely different model where they're going to have control rooms back at their locations and just have trucks for the cameras and distribution equipment as we get more and more fiber into these stadiums?
Yeah, I think you're already seeing it. Those companies aren't going to go away. They're going to innovate. Back in 17, when I started my first 2110, it was people were surprised that we did it, and we had a long plan. When we originally discussed this, we talked about, I had this long plan that was supposed to be over a 3-year span for Super Bowl. Because of supply chain, we had basically 2.5 weeks to get the whole system uplifted. So those people will innovate. It'll go to cloud, back to your NDI. SMPTE has IPMX that they're backing with the IP showcase, and it's a big push for that not low latency, but compressed video of a SMPTE 2110 version. So yeah, they're just going to innovate. It'll be more hybrid. It could go complete cloud. I'm sure that in the news and cable distribution, I was just at the RSN summit, and they were talking about how they're going to monetize their phones, how they're going to monetize web, how they're going to survive. And it just forces people to change and innovate and rely on that uncomfortability to move in a different direction.
Luciano,
I got to jump.
Go ahead.
One of my favorite Jesse lines, I'll paraphrase for him, but one of my messages for the last couple of years has been sort of this efficiency, sustainability message, because I kind of accidentally realized that 2110 was that much more efficient and that it was worth talking about. Even in a HD system, you could get to where you were saving a ton of rack space and equipment, and 80% electrical efficiency over the preceding SDI solutions and things like that. Jesse's line when he did that first set of links was that he threw out a whole trash can full of DAs and old equipment that just wasn't needed. It was just a whole trash can full. And I think everybody sees that, right? When Jesse's talked about, NEP and these groups, they have all seen the same thing he did of, well, wait a minute, I don't need as many intermediaries. I can reduce the latency. I can increase the bandwidth all at the same time. You're still going to have a technical director. You're still going to have a camera person. You'll still have engineers, but they don't have to babysit as much gear, and you don't have to worry about maintaining as much gear.
Do we get T-shirts that say "End Global Warming"? Use SMPTE 2110. Is that where we're going with this?
SMPTE would love that.
Yeah.
To Cassidy's point is, I try to make it where people can relate to it. So if you think about it, think when the electric car came out and everybody was like, it can only go 100 miles, and they challenged you to say how far do you drive? And the average person drove like 20 miles a day back and forth through work, and they were always afraid the battery was going to go out. So I challenge you, if you're doing a design, actually don't look at that big refrigerator. Write down on a piece of paper what number of sources you have, and you'll actually be surprised with something that you can grow, how little you have to buy in order to switch over and move in that 2110 direction.
And that's, I think, one of the biggest benefits, even when it was 2022 and 2110 on the IP side, is the fact you're no longer limited on your I/O counts. They can grow almost infinitely. You look at an Arista, is there 7500 series or 7800 series? Which series is it? It has 16 line cards in it.
Gates are the ones that have 400 gig now.
Yeah, so you effectively have a 4,000 square 8K 120 router on these places. Luciano, are you seeing? I know in Europe, if I'm not mistaken, there's obviously lots of OBs. A lot of production done that way. Are you seeing sort of that model? I don't want to say dwindle, but change. Because you have and I hate to put you on the spot, but you're a European contributor, because you have boundaries in countries, even though it's EU, but crossing a boundary with fiber may be a little bit different. But are you seeing sort of that same movement away from rolling hundreds of trucks to an event or a couple trucks to an event to something smaller and having stationary control rooms, especially with the cloud and what you guys are doing with the cloud?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's already happened. At Sky, we are running Formula One, we are running MotoGP in remote. In Italy, we are running the football, the second league of football in remote, and I think also I think the big change will be also on the third league that you are producing for OTT, for example, that you don't even think to send in the venue, even a small part of track, but you just send a crew, a very, very small crew with, 2 or 3 people, 4 people that are just bringing the camera, simple, let's say, encoding system. And maybe if you need to have one commentator on site, maybe you have some audio assistant, but everything will be bring back to the venue that is already happened. But as Sky, we are doing that on the cloud. We are running at the moment more than as a group more than 60, 70 gallery on the cloud, and we are every weekend, and we are planning to double this in the next 8 months. And I think the cloud for a group like Sky that is distributed across different, territory is a huge, let's say, benefit. We can, let's say, duplicate, on the cloud, just, scripting, the new platform that maybe someone can personalize the specific workflow, and another one can bring the same one or can start from this one and build another workflow. I think this is a major work that we are doing in Sky. Basically, we already move almost our cloud channel on the cloud. We have already 145 channels on the cloud that are, let's say, content-based channel, and within the 2024, we will move all the live event channel, we call event TV channel, on the cloud, and we will launch, pop-up channel just to managing content on the cloud. Archive is already there, gallery is already there, so everything is there. So we are managing across the different, let's say, territories, what we call the federated, MCR. So our network to bring signal between different country, and instead of having, receiving in each country, let's say, the same feed. Sometime, for example, we just finished Wimbledon. We maybe each country have its own, let's say, downlink or, let's say, fiber connectivity. We will bring once, and we will distribute across the country. But we are working actively also to do this in the cloud, and the multicast in the cloud will bring a huge benefit for us, because we can run multiple gallery. Maybe we can run multiple language on the cloud. We can have multiple commentator with different language, and we can distribute across different European territory that, as you know, is a different language. So I think will be very, 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 it's happening now. It's not something that will be the future. And I think company like NEP or EMG in Europe, basically they are transforming themselves, and they are, let's say, yes, they still have the XLL track, but they are moving, to create facility media hub, and they are providing this kind of services. For example, in UK, we are also doing Premier League, and one of the companies that is doing that is EMG. So they are, offering services to various broadcasters, creating this media hub that can, work in remote. And I think I don't think it's more than 5 years, everything will be in this direction. Also in Italy, one of the Serie A is the major football league in Italy. Have created a couple of years ago an hub where all the stadium are collected. They have the VAR for replay. So, and for sure, probably in the next couple of years, they will start to do the remote production itself, and they will produce and distribute content. So I think it's something that is happening today. So I think
very interesting.
Yeah.
Jesse, so in our industry, the latest technology that comes out, the 4K, the 8K, SDI, 2110, always normally gets adopted first by the ABC Disneys and the Foxes of the world, and then it slowly trickles down into that second tier, and then potentially corporate. And now you can go and buy a Blackmagic, a 10 mini switcher, and actually have professional level switching. Are you starting to see 2110 sort of migrate its way down? Has the cost and complexity been simplified that you're starting to see it in those call letter stations and at and I'll get this wrong because I don't remember, is it AA or AAA league collegiate sports? Are you starting to see that make its way in there? Or are they still traditional SDI?
So collegiate sports, it's definitely making an impact on. I know of two complete collegiate sports universities that went full 2110 this year. Mm-hmm. So they went out traditional RFP, and it was a 2110 RFP. They weren't even looking at a baseband solution. So that definitely is happening. I know of another large company in the news industry that's looking at 2110. It's a little slower adoption there, but mostly in that AAA, AA. The ones that I know of are still sticking with baseband because some places, especially in the sports world, it's a big lift for infrastructure within their stadium. They have to supply camera chains, and a lot of that, even when you did the big uplifts of the new routers, you didn't change out your cable infrastructure, your low voltage cabling, because Triac still worked. It was able to go around your stadium, and you maybe not did cameras that day, but that's where I see. But I'm interested in what Luciano was saying about the second screens. I mean, that's the flexibility of 2110 is, and you brought up before, is like Game Creek or NEP going to bring trucks or stop being trucks? Well, before in these large events, you always had that ESU, the engineering support unit, that was just a giant DA to feed all the feeds everywhere. Mm-hmm. What if we got to a world that was able to just bring the same complement to every game and now leverage that with some cloud hybrid that they could rent out all those feeds, and we can have the multiple languages. We could use different software to do it, different formats, NDI, SRT, IPMX, 2110. And, I think that scalability and that thought process is something definitely worth researching.
Mm-hmm. That was something that, Ano touched on, the coverage, right? And that's something that SMPTE 2110 with compression and the cloud, one of my stories from the switch side has been this accessibility message, right? There's events, and Jesse experienced this a little bit too, things that might not have gotten covered because you needed a truck, you needed all that equipment. Well, now, to Luciano's point, you can send a smaller production. So it's like, this entire facility can now be in a truck, like Jesse's talking about. This entire distribution hub can be in a truck. My production studio can be virtualized, or, just a small pack. And so there's all these things, there's all this content that can now be created that wouldn't have been feasible before. That accessibility is something that's new. And so even aside from the production flexibility of the audio and the video and all that in 2110, if you couple up this, compression, and the cloud can just be a natural extension of your on-prem, it all feels like one interconnected mesh globally. It means we're going to have way too many options for things to watch. More than we do now.
Well, this is a specific question for it, and of course, Cassidy and I have worked for a long time, and I always refer to him as Young Cassidy. So, Young Cassidy, over the past 2 decades, that crotchety old, broadcast engineer. If you had a single black frame, that was the end of your career. Can't do that. But now we've lived through YouTube and Vimeo and TikTok, and people broadcasting from everywhere on phones and recording, and now we're going to IP that doesn't quite have the same tolerances. Not that we ever want to drop a packet, but are we seeing in the designs of these systems that the customers or clients will give up some of that, quote unquote, perfection for the flexibility or at the end of the day, less dollars, that they're willing to do that. Are we seeing that a little bit more now, or is it still, hey, it's rigid, I can't drop a packet, don't even talk about dropping a frame?
Well, two things. It totally depends. Without going too deep into marketing, we actually are working on lossless through the cloud right now, and looks good. There are use cases where maybe Luciano's got some a Sky team where maintaining the quality of that original file or video is so high, from doing storage stuff, they'll having that original source be pristine for as long as you possibly can. For certain things, that's always going to be there, right? But at the same time, I kind of look at the industry now as, YouTubers are almost like affiliate stations. Content is king, and it doesn't matter what the distribution format is as much as what they're saying and what they're doing. And I can remember in my first master control job, we put up some cell phone footage, and this was old flip phone video footage that just looked terrible on a big screen. And the owner of the station I worked at actually called me directly and said, "What is this? Take this off the air right now. This looks terrible." And I said, "Well, this is the security footage we had. This is all we have to support the story." That was 2001 or two. Now, you guys think about the quality of video that we see in news stories, and anything goes, right? So I think it totally depends, and it's just a matter of we're willing to settle a little bit if it's the only thing. And we have so many people with cell phones out there generating content, but at the same time, going back to the 2110 conversation, I saw a system that was designed entirely for HD, where the ownership decided overnight to change it to a UHD system. And the only reason why that worked was because they had enough horsepower in the core, because it was IP. That would have been a multi-frame SDI router if they tried to do that. But it was I think it was a 4RU or a 2RU switch in the core for that system. So the possibilities here, again, you almost have too much flexibility, but it depends case by case on what you're trying to do.
Yep. Well, we're coming up on the top of the hour. This has been a fantastic conversation. So I want to, as the idiom in the U.S. is, let's go around the horn. Tell us a little bit about what's going on and what you want people to know. We'll start with our European guest, Luciano. What are you guys working on? What would you like our audience to know about Sky and the stuff that you're doing in 2110, whatever you'd like?
Oh, no, nothing specific. So I think we have a huge opportunity to, let's say, to change, let's say, the way we are producing our content. We want to, let's say, increase and giving the better experience to our client. Let's say we want to bring as much as possible content. Maybe with the same event to our client that maybe want to have a different view of the same event. For example, one of the interesting things that we recently done was bringing the onboard camera of Formula One directly to the secondary screen on all platform, on the app, on the Sport app, Sky Sport app, or on the Sky Box, on the Glass TV. So simply, adding, for example, in this case, adding a specific graphic for the specific, let's say, driver, adding, for example, the local commentator to the same feed, and giving, the user the experience, let's say, to see, yes, of course, the main feed, but also to go maybe in detail with, specific, Ferrari or let's say, Mercedes or whatever, Red Bull, whatever. So it can go inside and can, follow directly, the fight or the play. So I think all these kind of things will enhance the experience of the viewer, and from one side. From the other side, we need to keep the cost down because there is a big let's say pressure to let's say to keep the cost down, but giving to the client biggest experience. of course, with the best quality that we can.
Yes. And Jesse, what do you've got going on? What do you want the audience to know, and what do you got, coming up next for you?
Yeah, so that's a little off topic, but it relates to my 2110 knowledge. So I have recently started my own business in JPM Technology Consulting, and what my purpose is I would like to bring more young future engineers in. I've been very fortunate in the broadcast industry, has changed my life both financially and personally, in the opportunities that I got to experience. And that was molded by two groups of student help, one from Glendale Community College and the other one from Texas A&M, where I was able to develop some young engineers that taught me and to not only keep an open mind, but to let them into this little world to help develop standards, help develop programs, designs, and it's been very fortunate. So I just encourage everybody to reach out and take on some young challenges, and be open to their thought process. I was very closed-minded before, and I've seen where I grew up on a breadboard, they grew up with programming. So in a 2110 world, it could be very beneficial to you. So it doesn't take a lot of work. It just takes your own time and patience. So try to help out and help this industry grow in where a lot of people are having trouble sourcing engineers and talent.
Well, I agree, and I part of what I'm doing with SMPTE is trying to also engage with that younger student. Of course, I turned to young Cassidy, who I think was like, "What, you're 12 when you came to work for us, or whatever?" No, he was in his 30s.
Yeah.
But it is very important in our industry to really reach out and get that next generation trained up and experiencing the things that we've done. So, and Cassidy, we'll wrap it up with you. What have you got going on?
Yeah, I think, well, real quick before I move to my personal stuff, I would agree, we could have a whole podcast on, where the industry is going, and training and mentorships and apprenticeships. I'm a huge believer in those things. And I agree. I mean, I think all of us probably had mentors that got us where we are now. And I feel like despite any chaos that we see, I feel like media and entertainment is growing again because of that accessibility thing, phones and everything else. And it's just a matter of where we fit and how we tie it all together. So I think media as a whole is actually growing in a really interesting way. But personally, with Switch, we're looking at things like we talked about, how far can we push? How easy can we make it? How connected can we make 2110 and other IP formats feel through the cloud? Because everybody's talking about it, whether it's for elastic, I need burst capacity on a weekend, or I need a diverse redundancy path going through multi-cloud. So -7, 2110, PTP, uncompressed and compressed translations between things within the cloud. Those are the problems that we're kind of working through right now, with the goal that someone like Luciano or Jesse with his existing systems are plugging into it and using the mechanisms that they've already used on-prem. They're not developing to some custom API. And again, what makes it fun for me is I get to talk to all of them and figure out what they're trying to do and come up with their unique solution with these different pieces. So, that's really been the exciting part here, is finding these different sort of case studies and building around those. It's a really big toolbox, and I'm just having a lot of fun with that right now.
Excellent, excellent. Well, thank you all for joining us today. This is a fantastic conversation. Hopefully our audience got a lot of good educational elements out of it. I know I did. I always do, talking to both Jesse and Cassidy and obviously Luciano. And it's nice to put a face with projects we worked on in the past. So with that, we'll say, good afternoon, good evening, and stay tuned next month for our next episode of TKT Visionaries. Goodbye.